Welcome back to World Drum Club, everyone. I'm Kalani, your host and teacher. In this video, I'm going to be covering 5 of the most common hand drums with a view to helping you make a decision about which drum is right for you. And this could be for somebody who is looking to purchase their first drum. You want to get into hand drumming. You want to know what are some options, what drum should I get? Or if you already have a drum, what's the next one? Because it never ends. All right, so we're going to cover 5 of the most popular drums, and those are Bongos, the Conga Drum, which is here, Djembe, which I have here, the Djembe or Darbuka over here, and the Cajon, which is down here. So I'm going to cover all 5 of those, and I'm going to describe each one of them in terms of the size and the weight. I'm also going to cover a little bit about the technique just so you know what's involved. And we'll talk about things like the volume of each instrument, how loud are they, why would you want to pick one over the other in terms of that. Also, portability, how easy are they to store, to transport, to manage. And then finally, I'll cover a little bit on cost range, but there's a pretty big range there. And then at the end, after all that, I'm going to give you some options, and we're going to talk about some variations of all these that will essentially give you too many choices, too many options, but I hope that all the content you're about to get in this video will be helpful for you in deciding which drum or drums you want to get, and do you want it to be your first drum, or are you adding on to the drums that you already have? All right, so let's get right to it. And the first drum we're going to look at is the Conga Drum, which was my first drum. Oi! So let's cover the basics. The Conga Drum is an Afro-Cuban drum, Caribbean drum. It's made of wood traditionally, and I'm just going to cover the traditional version of each instrument right now. We'll get to the other stuff later. Wood drum, made of staves in a barrel shape, hardware. It's tuned with the hardware up here. I have videos on that. Usually has a cow skin or calf skin head. A lot of the modern drums have water buffalo, but blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get into all the variations. So Conga drums are big and heavy. You just saw me lug this thing up. So they're a large drum. They do weigh quite a bit. And so that's a consideration. Playing-wise, let's go to the overhead. So playing-wise, you've got, you're using your hand here. There's some technique involved, 3 basic tones and you're good to go. A few technique, I have a zillion conga videos. There's lots of good conga videos if you want to learn how to play the congas. What I like about them is that they're really the most widely used drum in all of music around the world. If you had to pick one hand drum, the congas are it, by far. They're just used in every style of music, just about, from coffee houses to concert halls. It was my first drum. I think it's a great first hand drum to learn the basic technique of hand drumming. It's a real grounding drum. It's melodic. It's got a warm sound. The volume can be anything from soft, just a solo conga and a guitar player, to playing in a band in a big concert hall. So they go from, I'd say, low volume up to pretty loud. They're not like screaming loud, not the loudest drum, but they cover a pretty big range. And portability-wise, they're the biggest, heaviest drum out of the set that I'm showing you here. So I would recommend starting with one. You don't have to start with 2 or 3. You can start with one conga and see how you like it. But then usually we end up with 2 or 3 in a set. So that's just something to consider if you are going to be playing out. Now, if you want to have something for home or wherever you want to leave it, in your studio or at wherever you're going to play it, that's fine. But if you want to move it around, if you want a portable drum, then the congas tend to fall down the list a little bit in terms of ease of use. All right, so you probably have to get cases for them. You're going to lug them around. They're kind of heavy. So just keep that in mind. Also, the congas, I like to play seated. I like to put the congas straight on the floor. You can put them on stands. You can stand up and play. You can have stands that hold them when you're seated. And I would recommend that because if because the bottom of the conga is tapered, so if there's people around, it's kind of crowded, there's other people moving around, they can be knocked over pretty easily. I'm just mentioning that in case you didn't know. They have a tendency to get knocked over fairly easily, so just keep it in mind. But there's ways around that. You can have a stand for them. Cost-wise, congas, I mean, my first drum was $300-400, but that was in the early 1980s. The same drum now is $1,200 to $1,500 if it was new, if it was just made. You can get congas, you can get a set of congas for, now I'm just talking, this is 2022. I'm in Southern California, so these are kind of US prices. A couple $100 with a stand for a cheap set, all the way up to $1,200 to $1,500 per drum for craftsperson made, basically handmade drums. So there's a huge range, but on average, a decent conga, you can expect to pay anywhere from $300 to $500 per drum, and then maybe plus or minus $100. Used market is good. It's a good place to look. Couple $100 a drum is not a bad price at all. $200 to $300 for used congas is reasonable. All right, let's move on and look at the other full-size drum, or what I would say is the other large drum, and that is the djembe. And the djembe is a West African drum, usually carved from a single log, and it has rope tuning. So real quick, I want to go back to the conga for a second. Congas are very easy to tune. You could use a wrench on them, use a crescent wrench. Pretty easy to tune. Djembes are also easy to tune, so don't let the rope scare you, but they have a different system. So rope tuning, goat skin head, natural skin head. You can see the overhead here. This is about a 13-inch drum. It's an average size drum. Djembes have, and let me show you the carving on this one. Djembes usually carved, and you can see that you tip it forward to play, and they have a great sound. Now, this drum is kind of heavy, but depending on the wood, they can be lighter. So you want to check the drum in person if you can. If you can't, you could ask how heavy, how much does this drum weigh? How much does that drum weigh? The harder the wood, the heavier the drum. That's just the way it is. So size-wise, you can tell it's still a pretty large drum. Hardwood, a really hardwood djembe is going to be pretty heavy. So transportation in that regard might be a factor, depending on where you want to take it, what you want to do. It's not as big as a conga drum, but it's still can be a pretty big drum to lug around. Playing-wise, it's similar to congas, not exactly the same, but you have, three basic sounds. I would say that the djembe could be a little harder on your hands. It's not as soft kind of feeling as the conga. That's my opinion, but it depends how you have it tuned. The volume on djembes can be louder, brighter. Again, it depends on tuning, but they can get pretty loud. So if you want a drum that you could take somewhere and really be heard and play loud, then the djembe is for you. Portability-wise, I just mentioned, so, usually people don't have multiple djembes, so if you want to have one drum that you have and play, and that's kind of like your one thing, a djembe would be a good choice for the reasons I mentioned. It's got, full bass tone, high slaps, you get your three sounds, and then you go play, usually in ensembles. Great, people like to take them to drum circles. They do pretty well outside. They're made to be played outside, Cost-wise, we're still looking at, several hundred entry level. I mean, you can get a cheap djembe for $150 now, but I'm talking about a proper djembe made in West Africa, carved with rope tuning, a good head. You're probably looking at starting $300-400 and then up to $1,200-1,500 for a really nice drum. Part of the cost of any drum is also replacing the head occasionally. Congas, on the one hand, the heads can last years. You're not going to break a conga head, although you might want to replace it after a while, just like you would replace guitar strings or a reed. But djembe heads tend to not last as long. And you can see at the from the construction that the heads are also probably not as easy to change yourself. I can do it, but I'm a professional. If you're not a professional, you want to have a drum that's easier to manage the head, you could go with a mechanical tuning like the conga. For this rope tuning, you either want to have somebody who can change the head for you or learn how to do it yourself. But it's not as easy. So I'm just saying eventually you might have to deal with that aspect of ownership of a djembe. All right, so that's where I'm going to leave the djembe for now. We'll come back to all these things in a little bit when we talk about variations, because there are some factors that might change your mind about that. Another drum that looks a little bit like a djembe, but it's not a djembe, is the Djembe, as it's popularly known. But actually that name is used more in the West, what we call the West, like Europe and the United States. This drum, more traditionally, would be called Darbuka or Derbeki and possibly tabla. It's thought of as an Egyptian, Turkish, Iranian, used in what we call the Middle East. Great drum. You can see very simply constructed. Usually it was traditionally clay. This is aluminum. Lots of options. I'll just use the term Djembe because it's common. And if you want to shop for a drum, that's probably the search term you're going to use. Even though if you want to go online and look at people playing them, I would recommend Darbuka as a search term. But you can see here, it's got a plastic head, this one. It's got tuning by Allen wrench on the top, so pretty easy to tune. It's got beautiful inlay. This is an aluminum drum, and we usually play it across the lap. Again, this is not a lesson video, but just so you can hear it. And you can go, I want you to go look at or listen to people playing all these drums when you're done here, if you're not familiar with them already. But the Darbuka or Djembe is a great drum for anyone who would like to have a nice range, a warm sound, a wide range of sounds, feels good, smooth, easy on your hands, portable, cost effective. You get a lot of bang for your buck when you buy a Darbuka. They're not incredibly expensive. They're fair. You can see that this will fit in an overhead on an airplane. So way more portable. Plastic head means the weather. You don't have to consider the weather as much. Aluminum shell. These are basically like bulletproof drums. So I really like the Darbuka as a one drum. Like if you want to just get into hand drumming, I really highly recommend it. Lots of music available if you want to go traditional, like playing for belly dance or playing in that traditional styles, or just have a drum that you can rock out on, jam, do whatever. You can also play the Darbuka between your legs like this. Just easy, like more like Conga or Djembe technique. Lots of options. Cost-wise, a decent drum, you're still looking at $300-400, but you can get these all the way down in the hundreds range. And then up, a little more if you want something fancy. But that's not bad for a really nice instrument, that you could have easily for many years and enjoy for many years. All right, so that's Darbuka. It's not a little djembe. All right, let's put that over there for now. Let's go to the bongos. And bongos are, of course, one of our most popular drum. In fact, bongos is the name that people who don't know about hand drumming call every drum they see. And that's okay. I'll let it slide this time. All right, so bongos, all right. If you don't know what bongos are, where have you been? Bongos are great. They're two little drums. Obviously, you get two drums for the price of one, small and large, connected in the middle. You can play them lots of different ways. I mean, they're used traditionally with the congas or, instead of the congas in certain music, but, Afro-Cuban, Caribbean music, salsa. And they sound great. Now, there are, obviously, there's some pros to the bongos. They're used in lots of styles. They're very small. They're portable. They sound great. You get two drums. They're versatile. I love bongos with just like acoustic guitar. Or just a small ensemble. You just need a set of bongos or somebody reading poetry, and you're good to go, right? So really versatile. They just add a nice little flavor to music. Low to medium volume. Technique now, though, is where I think I would caution somebody in terms of, oh, I'll just get a set of bongos and start hand drumming. Now, you can play them any way you want, but if you're going to play the bongos in the traditional style, we're really talking about using the edge of our, the tips of our fingers mostly, like out here, a little bit here, but you can get out to the edge of your fingertips. So that can be a little more, problematic if you have, if you're not an experienced drummer already. So I wouldn't recommend bongos as a first drum, actually. I would go with like congas or darbuka because they're a little bit, I think the entry curve is a little more gentle than bongos. Bongos are kind of intense, actually. And they're, for the size, they're actually pretty heavy. So that's why I like to recommend that people get a stand. So if you do want to get bongos, there's some ways you can make them easier to play. For example, you can use little plastic spatulas, like those little, those spatulas you use for cake batter. Get a couple of those, or some plastic sticks, or wooden sticks, but you got to be careful with those. But you can use other things to strike the drums. And then if you use a stand, it makes it a bit easier. So you can use a stand-up stand like this with a pretty big base. This stand has this kind of base, triangular base, but there's also stands that are smaller that you can use to hold them in the traditional position, which would be seated. It would be down between your knees in that area. So you lower them down, but still support them with a stand, all right? Portability, obviously, they're very portable, right? So that's a big plus. Cost-wise, I would say a set of bongos, if you want a good set, you're still looking at about the same, a little bit less than a single conga drum, maybe 2/3 of the price of a conga drum, but, I don't know, as of the making of this video, $200-$300, and then up if you're getting into the craftsman, level of instrument. All right, but get a stand with them, and just know that you might need to spend a little bit of time working up your technique, get your hands in shape, and you might have some discomfort when you first start really getting into the bongos. So even though they're very popular, maybe not the best drum to start on. All right, we got one more, and then I'm going to circle back around, and we're going to talk about variations and options for all of these drums that could maybe affect your choice, on what you want to do. Now, the last drum we have is down here. That's the cajon, and the cajon is a box. It's a wooden box. The side or back will have a sound hole for resonation. The front is called the tapas, or the head. It's actually a thin piece of wood, and we play the cajon. Now you can hear what a beautiful resonant tone that is. And then we've got kind of sharper tones on the top, edge tones, or which would be like the equivalent of a slap, or bass drum, snare drum. So I love the cajon, you guys. Ooh. I almost fell backwards. That would have been funny. I love the cajon. All right, I do. I love the cajon. I play it all the time. And, cajons have had this big, renaissance, just explosion, right? It's like ukuleles and cajons, just went, boo, after djembes. So cajons are great. You get a lot of bang for your buck. You also get a chair. You get a seat when you buy a cajon, so you don't need to buy a seat. Because if you're playing, congas, djembes, bongos, darbuka, you need a chair, right? You can't sit on them and play them. But the cajon, you can. So that's a plus. I do recommend if you get one that you get a padded top. It's just more comfortable. Unless you have an extra padded bottom. All right, I don't, so I like the padded top. Cajons are a fantastic instrument. Obviously they're not small, but they're not as big, and they're certainly not as heavy as congas and djembes. So that's a plus. So they're not going to fit in an overhead, but it's just a box. So it's durable. You don't have to tune anything. They're pretty much bulletproof. They sound great. Just sit on it and play. You don't have to know a lot about anything. You've got a low bass tone. You basically have a drum set in a box, kind of. And the techniques, again, it's pretty basic. Like, if you can just thump your hand on the top of the head and then go to the corner, play with your fingers, you know, you're pretty much making music right away. So there's not as much technique. I'm not saying there can't be advanced technique with cajon. There can. I'm just saying the entry point to sounding pretty good is open. All right. The cons of it, I would say, is that you are in a position where you might be leaning over, might be hunching over. So if you want to, you know, mind your back, your low back, I like to, as you just noticed, tip the cajon backwards a little, like from here. This is flat on the ground, and then I like to move it back a little bit like that to make it a little more accessible, so I don't have to lean over as much. I can keep my back more upright, straight. Low back is curved a little. So there's ways of playing it that are not going to pose an issue with your back, but I just want to tell you that that might be something to consider, so you can, you know, make that determination based on your preferences. Cost-wise, the cajons, you know, like many of these instruments, there's a pretty big range, but I would say expect to spend on a good instrument anywhere from $250 to $550, or let's say $300 to $600 on a nice instrument. You can spend a little more, you can spend a little less, but that's what I would guesstimate. And there are so many companies making cajons now. I mean, everybody's making cajons, everybody's making ukuleles. There's ukulele companies making cajons, there's cajon companies making ukuleles. It's crazy. So as far as volume, also, I would put the cajon in a low to medium volume. It's not that you couldn't play it louder, but it is solid wood, so you don't want to go wailing, you know, playing, like beating the cajon really hard. So if you want an instrument that you can take to, you know, an outdoor drum circle, I would actually not recommend the cajon unless you just want to go play and kind of listen to yourself and do your own thing, but you don't really care if other people can hear you or not. I mean, maybe that's a good thing for you. Maybe you just want to go jam and not be really loud. In that case, yeah, cajon is cool. Great for just small ensembles, accompanying, you know, a guitar player or a small group. Awesome for that. All right, so we've covered pretty much everything individually. Now next, I want to cover some options. I want to talk to you about some options that could maybe change the calculus in terms of which instrument you get. Before we do that, I want to ask you to subscribe, hit the bell if you want to get notifications, and hit that little like, whatever that is, finger, hand, before you forget. So do that now, and we'll be right back right after this. Okay, we're back. Now, I wanted to cover some of the material options, in other words, the construction options on some of these, because that could change your mind about getting one of these drums or not getting it. So, as you know, many instruments these days are made from alternative materials, let's call it, or non-traditional materials. For example, you can get congas that have synthetic head. Well, in any of these drums, you can get synthetic heads. So that's not going to change the weight, but it'll change the way it responds in different weather. So like the Darbuka is the only one right now that has a plastic head, but all these drums could have plastic heads on them. You could get, for example, a djembe that is not made of wood. It could be made of a synthetic material, and some of those materials are like ABS plastic, and they're very light. So you could have a djembe that's this big, but it could be as light as a Darbuka. You can also have djembes that have conga, what we call conga style tuning, or mechanical tuning, or lug tuning. All those are kind of interchangeable terms. So if you are shying away because of the ropes, which I like the ropes. They're easy, they're smooth, they're just, no hardware is good in my book. But if you want to have tuning hardware, which makes it easier to change the head, and I mentioned that earlier, you could do that. So that's an option. So you could have a light djembe with a mechanically tuned head that's plastic, for example. Now, is it going to sound like a traditional djembe? No. I think of those drums as like djembe-like, or you know, what? Maybe it's a different drum, or it's a drum that's based on the djembe, right? But that doesn't mean it couldn't be the right drum for you. So it kind of depends on what your goals are. As far as congas, there's even congas. I'm not going to lift this up anymore. I'm tired. It's like, ugh, There's congas that are called, I don't know what they call them, like travel congas or performance. You can look them up. They're like cut off congas. It's like a third of a conga, just the top part. And then you just play that. And so now 2 congas take up the space of 1, and it's lighter, and you have a little set. There's even tabletop congas that are just basically the head and the rim. And you could get that if you're concerned about space, you know. Or now those don't perform like a full-size traditionally made conga, but again, maybe that's okay. Bongos, same thing. You can get cheaper bongos, lighter bongos. You know, you can get a smaller cajon if you want. You can get a conga cajon or a djembe cajon, or you can get, there's hybrid instruments like, you know, there's a drum called an ashiko that's sort of between a conga and a djembe. It's a cone shaped, and you have those with rope tune heads, mechanical heads, wood top heads. I have bongos that have wood tops. They're bongo cajons. I love them. They're great. So there's lots of options when it comes to all these instruments. It's not like you only have to choose from these. That being said, my advice as a percussionist is get a traditional drum and learn how to play it so that you understand what it is and you enter into the culture in the, you know, let's call it the traditional doorway, and you learn about, you know, what is this drum, how is it played, who's playing it, who are the people that have developed it, kind of, who are, you know, whether it's a person or a group or, you know, a band or a certain people in a certain geographical area. What have they done with it? So that when you hear it, you know the difference. You know, you can hear the drum, you say, oh yeah, that is a Darbuka. You know, that's a conga. I hear it in the rumba music, or I hear it in salsa. I would recommend that. But get the drum that speaks to you, that you want to play. And also, let's talk money for a second. Let's talk value. I always recommend that people get the best instrument, the best quality instrument that they can afford. And the reason for that is several reasons. One, you will enjoy it more because it's going to perform at a higher level. It's like just spending more money on a car or something. I like to drive. I will spend as much money as I can on a car that's responsive, that has good acceleration, good brakes, good handling, because if I'm driving the car, I want it to perform, and it's safe. It's safer if something is responsive, right? You don't want to be screeching all over the highway if you got to slam on your brakes. So even though that's a loose analogy to a drum, I can tell the difference. When I play a conga that's a quality drum, I can do more with it. It sounds better. I'm going to enjoy it more because I can get more out of it. So I hope that makes sense. And that goes for all these drums. Secondly, it will retain its value. If you buy a quality instrument, chances are, if you hold on to it for a while, and this happened with me, so I'm speaking from experience. If you hold on to a quality instrument, let's say you get an instrument that is what I call a craftsman instrument. In other words, it was made by a person or a small group of people, and that's what they do, and they know what it's supposed to be, and they make it to be played by musicians. In other words, there's a very close connection with the people who are making the instrument and the people who are playing the instrument. Probably the people who are making it are also players, right? So I want to differentiate that. That's what I call craftsman made, as opposed to factory made, which is not that, right? It's people making something they may or may not even know what they're making. They're just making it. Doesn't mean those are bad. It just means there's not as much of a connection and an understanding of what that thing is supposed to be, ideally, which is a musical instrument. So if you get that kind of instrument, and that does take more money, it's more of an investment, but if you spend the money on that, you'll enjoy it, it'll perform more, and it'll probably go up in value. I have a set of congas, well, I don't anymore, I sold them. I had a set of congas that I bought, and then I sold them a number of years later for a profit. You know, I sold them for more than I paid for them. And you see that now. If you can go online and shop, look at used stuff. You'll see people with some instruments and you're like, wow, why is that so expensive? It's because it was from a certain time. They don't make them like they used to in many cases. There's still some really good instruments being made, but they are pricey. So when you see used instruments and you're like, wow, that's so much more than it was new, but that's why, because it was from that era where they were putting a lot of time and attention and effort into making it, and it's still a great instrument today. So think about that. If that's not where you're at, if you want to just get a good, factory-made instrument, that's cool too. I would still recommend getting the best factory-made instrument or mass-produced instrument that you can afford for the same reasons. It's going to perform better. You'll get more resale value out of it. If you want to go in super low entry level, like just get the cheap stuff, what they might call student instruments or entry level, that's okay. I don't recommend that. It's not gonna sound the best. It may not tune up nice. It's just gonna be like flimsy feeling. You're not going to get any money for it when you sell it. It's just going to end up in a garage sale. Somebody's going to pay $10 for it maybe. It's just because people generally don't want those instruments. There's no resale market for them really. So think about that. Think ahead. Is this something I really want to get into? Am I going to grow out of this instrument really quickly? Or can I get an instrument that I can actually grow into for a while before I might grow out of it? So I would go for the middle range or higher and stay away from the real inexpensive stuff. For instruments for you, if you're buying a bunch of instruments for a group, then that's a different issue. But I'm talking about for you, buying for yourself. Okay, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. So if you have questions for me based on anything I've talked about, you can contact me at patreon.com/Kalani. That's our community support site. You can direct message me over there, and you also can get access if you join to a lot of our exclusive courses. There's tons of videos, hundreds of videos over there. Full courses for all these instruments. If you're excited about them and you want to get into them and learn, from a professional, you could do that over there, super cheap. And then you can message me directly with your questions. So that's where, if you have a question, you can contact me. If you have a comment or something helpful or a bit of information, or you just want to comment me on my looks or my shirt, you can do that in the comments below. I accept all sorts of comments, but I especially liked funny ones. So if you leave a comment, try to make it at least funny. Do us a favor. All right, I appreciate you guys stopping by. This is World Drum Club. I'm Kalani. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this video. If you have, show your appreciation and support. And I'll see you guys in a future video. Thanks for watching.